Election day has turned into election month, as some counties in California are still counting votes. In fact, as I was just looking through the election results, there are a couple of congressional districts in California where we're just getting about 53% of the vote has been reported. I mean, we're a week after the election. Now, how can the most technologically advanced country in the world not count its votes in a timely fashion? I mean, you've got most countries get it done within a 24-hour period. This, I mean, especially in light of the fact that people question the election results, and the longer it takes, the more opportunity there is for manipulation. You would think that they would want to do these elections in a timely fashion, which would make them beyond reproach. I think it's something we need to be talking about. Joining me now to discuss this is J. Christian Adams, President and General Counsel of the Public Interest Legal Foundation. He formerly served in the Department of Justice during the George W. Bush administration. J. Christian, welcome to Washington Watch once again.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
Okay, I'm going to start with a very simple question. We had the results from Florida within hours. Texas, very similar. Other jurisdictions have needed more than a week to count votes. How can this happen?
Very simple answer. Mail ballots. The states that have the problems are the ones that shifted to mail balloting in 2020 and have really amplified the process in 2022. Arizona, Nevada's completely automatic mail ballot, California's mail ballot, New Jersey's mail ballot, Oregon mail ballot. I could go on. And the states we don't know the results from are the ones that use mail ballots. It's that simple.
So prior to the election, we had the president and the Democrats out saying, look, it's going to take us a while to get election results, so don't get upset about it. And if anybody that you're going to support is an election denier, don't vote for them. That needs to be the litmus test, is that they'll accept the outcome. Look, I'm not one that is given to conspiracies and all that kind of stuff, so I'm not going to go there. But I am going to say that this just doesn't add up. Now, it goes back, I think, to about 2016 when California changed their laws. But still, isn't there a way to create a system, if you're going to allow mail-in balloting, that you can count these in a timely fashion so we can get results and it doesn't raise questions about whether or not the outcome's been manipulated?
No, I got to tell you, the one thing you could do, which a lot of people are against, is start to tabulate the mail ballots before Election Day. Now, some people are highly against that. The bad news is, I'm afraid, this is here to stay. People like mail voting. As a matter of fact, everywhere that it was on the ballot, and it was in a lot of states, it was expanded. States approved things like more drop boxes, more early voting. They voted against voter ID in voter referendums. So I think we really need to, I'm not happy about it, but we need to get used to it. Don't forget, Tony, the first state to really adopt early mail voting was a Republican state of Wyoming. Passed the House unanimously in 2011, passed the Wyoming Senate, I think it was 34-0, to have 45 days of early voting with mail ballots. Florida went to it after the 2000 election to take some pressure off Election Day. In 2004, it debuted. So there's some history here, but it hasn't been nationwide. And I think in the states that moved to it, particularly Nevada and Arizona and California, you can see the downside of having a mail election, and that is it takes forever to get a result.
All right, let me go back to what you just said, that, and I agree with this, but I want to know who's opposed to the idea of tabulating these first, so that you don't have, after everything else is counted, all of a sudden you have this deluge of mail-in ballots that are counted. That's what raises suspicion, because I've seen it happen in the past where you get a ballot dump and it changes the outcome of the election.
Yeah, Republicans have been opposed to it because the Democrats have so focused on mail balloting and getting their vote out in the mail. The Republicans have opposed early tabulation because it would show landslides for Democrats. early on and discouraged the election day voting of Republicans. So it's largely been opposed by Republicans.
Well, I mean, but you could have them where they're tabulated but not released, so that as soon as the polls close, you get those numbers from the mail-in ballots, and they're not waited till after the fact. Because, I'm not saying this has happened, but I do know there's been some allegations, and I actually think there have been some cases of fraud where you need a few extra ballots and they're kind of thrown in there. And I think look, there's a lot of fraud in so many aspects of modern life. We ought to try to make this as fraud-proof as possible.
And I'm even more worried about disenfranchisement with mail balloting than I am fraud, because the post office has a stated goal of a 94% success rate on delivering political mail on time. That's 6% failure. Is that an acceptable disenfranchisement rate in an election? The post office loses mail.
Right.
I don't want to see people lose their right to vote because of the mail.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree with that. But if people choose to do that, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to stick my ballot in the mail. I'm going to vote early, or I'm going to vote, but I'm going to vote in person. But I still think there ought to be a way to corral these votes so that they are not being tabulated after all the other votes are counted, and again, open to manipulation and questioning the integrity of our elections. Because I know this is your concern, because you do such a great job on this. But if our system is undermined, it's going to have an impact on people voting. And I want people to vote. I don't want them to feel like their vote's not going to count. And so we have to have the most, fair, effective system possible.
You're exactly right. I mean, I think that's what happened in part in the 2020 Georgia runoff is, for a variety of reasons we don't need to detail here. People thought, oh, my vote's not going to count, so I'm not going to participate in this runoff. And look what happened. We got a Senate that, had us on the edge of the cliff for the Republic. And let's not do it again. And when you have an election with so many lost ballots, so many ballots that get sent to the wrong place through the mail, so many delayed results, people start to question the outcome.
Now, I am not for a one-size-fits-all federal prescription here, okay? We're actually opposed to that when you look at H.R. 1, which was a federal takeover of our election system. So we have to realize that we have 50 states, and they're all responsible for their own election systems within certain parameters. So, California, super Democratic majority out there, they do crazy stuff. What can we do? What are the common sense guardrails that we can put in place to preserve election integrity?
Well, look, for mail balloting, Georgia had the answer. You use a unique identifier on your ballot. You fill it out. So it's like voter ID for the mail. That's the best thing to do with that. On the issue of time, I mean, the Public Interest Legal Foundation brought a lawsuit in Virginia, which we won, that prohibited Virginia from accepting ballots late that didn't have a postmark. We had Delaware mail balloting struck down entirely in a lawsuit that the Public Interest Legal Foundation brought and won about 3 weeks ago. So we canceled out all mail balloting in Delaware in that case because of the Delaware Constitution prohibits it. So step one is to strike when you can. You can't strike everywhere. You can't strike aimlessly, but strike when you can. The second thing I'm looking at, Tony, is the federal statutes that generally require the election to be done on Election Day,
right? Not
4 days after Election Day. And I'm looking at potentially some litigation there to try to get states to comply with that mandate.
Be a vast improvement, so that at least by the next. I mean, I can remember, you would know the results election night. And if it was odd if you had to wait to the next morning to get the election results, but now it's almost since 2000 in the Gore-Bush race, it's almost become, I don't know, it's almost like we've been desensitized to the fact that we used to know elections right away. Now we're waiting days, if not weeks.
Desensitized might be the right word. This past election, I turned in at about 8:30 because I said, what they're saying now is not going to be what they're saying in the morning. So I just went to bed and I thought nothing's going to, be finalized. And sure enough, I woke up and, the world had turned. And so I think that maybe all that prep that you heard from the president and other vote by mail activists, which always are funded by the left, like the Vote at Home Foundation. They were warning us, don't be afraid of the scary monster that doesn't give you results for 2 weeks. But that's the world we're in because of the mail balloting system.
But we can't accept it. I just don't think we should accept it.
Yeah, I don't think we should accept late results. There has to be a way, whether it's early tabulation, the Republicans are just going to have to ease up on their fear that the data will become used to suppress their turnout, and find a way to make it happen, because we shouldn't have to wait for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I agree. Now, let me ask you another question, J. Christian Adams, about ballot harvesting. We're seeing that kind of move to jurisdictions around the country.
Yeah, and like I said, there was a ballot harvesting wasn't on the ballot, but in places like Michigan and Arizona, there was ballot drop boxes on the ballot, and the voters approved it overwhelmingly in those states. So apparently people like it. It's the culture has moved on this. And the number one way you manipulate a ballot is in somebody's kitchen. I litigated a case called United States versus Brown when I was at the Justice Department, where people were getting voted in their kitchens by people like Patsy Roby. You can read the opinion, and it's just a way of. And by the way, it was voluntary. The voter wanted them to do it, so it wasn't like they were stealing a vote. They were just filling out the ballot, and the voter on the stand said, because the harvester knows who to vote for better than me. That was literally testimony in federal court. So, the way to solve that problem is not an easy one, because it's a cultural one. And you know better than anyone, when there's a cultural problem, the solutions are not so easy to come by.
True, but in those jurisdictions where we're seeing this ballot harvesting made legal, like California is certainly kind of the prime example, we don't like it, but I think we've got to use it. And legally within the confines and not doing anything illegal. But I think we need to use, if the left wants these laws in place, I think we ought to use them.
Well, let me give you a perfect example of that, and that's curing. This rise of vote by mail led to a curing effort in 2020 where the left engaged in curing, which means you get a list of the defective mail ballots. You know that before the election, because the election officials have segregated the ones that aren't filled out correctly. Well, that starts a chase. And the Democrats have gotten very good at organizing curing efforts where they figure out who has a defective ballot, they contact that person, they take them to the polls. I would submit they might even be able to buy them something, because it's not for a vote, it's to fix a vote. It's different than actually to vote, because they've already voted. And they go and they get that person to fix their ballot, and they know they've got a Democrat. Is there a Republican counterpart to this? What do you think? Of course not. They're like 5 years behind. And so there's not an effective curing operation on the Republican side in response to this rise of mail balloting.
Well, Jay Christian, I want to thank you for joining us today, but I think, and I know you're the expert, you're on top of this, but just from my vantage point, I think conservatives, Republicans have a lot of work to do in the next 2 years to get prepared for the 2024 election.
You are absolutely correct.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us. Always great to see you. You do great work.
Thank you, sir.